It was supposed to be a routine service, just an oil change, tire rotation, maybe a look at the wipers that had started streaking. I'd been driving that car for nearly 16 years, beige, dependable, with a little dent above the rear fender that no one ever noticed but me. That morning, I packed a banana, my crossword book, and a thermos of weak coffee, the kind I'd always liked. I told them I didn't need help getting their eye, was fine to wait. The waiting room smelled like warmed-up brake dust and stale air conditioning. The chairs were cracked, their edges curling like tired paperbacks. I sat by the vending machine, where the buzz of the light above made a quiet, rhythmic hum. Two young men waited across from me, one glued to his phone, the other chewing gum too loudly. I didn't mind, was used to waiting. I'd waited through late pickups, through doctor appointments, and through long silences after asking if someone needed anything. I remember the clock behind the desk said 11:43 when I noticed something was off. I hadn't heard the usual sounds, the rev of engines being tested or the quiet worry of tools, just stillness. Then a boy, no older than my grandson, came out from the service bay. He held a clipboard like it was too heavy, ma'am, he said, glancing between the paper and my eyes. "It's you, Mrs. Monroe?" "Helen Monroe." I nodded. He paused. "Your car, the Camry, it's not here anymore." I tilted my head. "Excuse me," he fidgeted. "I was told it's been signed over. Your son came in. He said the title was his. It's already been picked up." I didn't understand what he meant at first. That word "signed over" floated above me like smoke I couldn't touch. I stared through him for a moment, waiting for a correction, a punchline, something dot. Then he added, almost apologetically, said you wouldn't be driving much anymore. That's when I felt it, that tiny sharp sound inside, like a needle snapping. It's a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It just folds in on itself. I sat down again slowly, even though I hadn't realized I'd stood. My fingers curled around the banana in my purse like it was an anchor. I didn't say a word. Not then. They'd taken my car, my keys were still in my coat pocket. I walked home that day, nearly 3 miles. I didn't call for a ride. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I needed to feel the rhythm of my feet on pavement, needed the air to sting my face, and I needed to be reminded that I could still move under my own power. People passed me in their SUVs and in their leased sedans, and I wondered how many of them had ever been quietly erased by the people they once raised. I'm Helen Monroe, 71, widow, mother of 2, grandmother of 5. And that morning, in a mechanic's waiting room off Route 27, my son decided I no longer needed a way home. No fight, no explanation. It's paperwork. That's how it happens sometimes. It doesn't happen with a slap or a scream, but rather with a signature in ink you've never seen dry dot later that night. I sat at the kitchen table staring at a bowl of soup I hadn't touched. My legs still ached from the walk, but it wasn't the physical ache that got to me. It was the quiet logic of it all. It's the way they must have discussed it. She doesn't really drive anymore. It's not safe. She probably won't even notice. I could hear their voices in my mind, kind and clipped and justified, but I noticed the absence. Of course I noticed. I didn't call him. I didn't ask why. I already knew. It wasn't just about the crit, it was about everything else. They'd started deciding without me. That was the moment. I understood something deep and cold. They had stopped seeing me as a person who owned things, who needed things, who chose. Things I had become someone they managed, and I think in a quiet way. They thought they were helping, but I didn't feel helped. I felt erased. I used to drive that same Camry to parent-teacher meetings and late-night pharmacy runs. Back when both boys still lived under my roof, I kept track of everyone's allergies, birthdays, and which cousin had just gotten engaged. There was a time when I could rattle off their favorite meals like a well-worn prayer. Chicken tetrazzine for Mark, spaghetti with no sauce for Jamie. I'd freeze portions, label them with dates, and tuck them into their college bags with little notes I never asked them to mention. My husband passed before the boys were fully grown suddenly. Stroke in the middle of a mild September. One minute he was rinsing apples in the sink for pie, and the next I was holding a kitchen towel to his temple while calling an ambulance that didn't make it in time. I didn't have the luxury to break down. They needed me, and I needed to stay upright for them. At the funeral, I remember pressing Jamie's trembling hand to his chest and whispering, "We'll be okay." I meant it, too. I took a job at the local library part-time, then full-time when the budget allowed. It was quiet work, but steady. The kind of place where people noticed if your blouse had a coffee stain, or if you didn't eat your lunch. I liked that kind of noticing. I clipped coupons. I tracked every dollar in a worn green ledger. That Cartha, one they took I paid for myself in full. It's 5 years of savings, slow and deliberate, built out of side gigs, ironing other people's linens, and tutoring second graders in reading. I chose that car because it was safe, because it started in the winter, and because I could trust it to get me to work and home again. When Jamie had his appendix removed, I slept in the hospital armchair all 3 nights. When Mark's wife miscarried, I sat on their porch and watered their tomato plants while they stayed locked inside, grieving. When they each bought houses, I handed them both checks from my retirement account, not large, but enough to cover furniture or a few months of bills. I told them not to worry about paying me back. I didn't expect medals. But I thought foolishly, maybe that the love I gave would root somewhere. That it would grow into memory, into care, even the little things. I remembered anniversaries. They forgot. I sent birthday cards even when I knew they'd be opened weeks late. I stayed silent when they said thoughtless things when Jamie joked about my handwriting being too old-fashioned, or when Mark laughed that I still used paper bills instead of apps. I didn't push back. I just adjusted, tucking my hurt into quiet corners. I kept a box in my bedroom closet. Inside it were school drawings, letters from camp, baby teeth sealed in envelopes. And one missing date on the back of a photo I could never quite remember. That box felt sacred to me, like proof I had lived a whole giving life. That I was more than background. But I don't think they ever saw that side. In their eyes, I suspect I became predictable, a safe presence, someone who could be leaned on endlessly without complaint. And maybe I allowed that too, easily. I can't tell you when it started the shift. It wasn't overnight. Just a series of small things, asking if they'd like to come by and hearing. We're just swamped this month, offering to bring over soup when they were sick, only to be told, it's okay, we got delivery. Missing birthdays I once planned. I told myself they were busy, that it wasn't personal, that I should be proud of how independent they were. But it chipped away year by year until I felt like a shadow standing in the wings of a play I once starred in, and Styli didn't complain. Because that's what you do when you love someone beyond measure. You stay, you show up. Even if they stop noticing, even if they take your car without asking. What hurt most wasn't the medal or the keys or the signature. It was the story behind it, the one where I didn't matter enough to be consulted. I was a problem to be solved. They didn't mean to hurt me. I truly believe that, but that didn't make the hurt any less real. Sometimes I wonder if I'd raised them too gently. I may have spent too much time teaching them to communicate politely, but not enough time teaching them to listen. Or maybe on this thought stings more, maybe? They just grew up into men who couldn't see their mother as a full person anymore. Not someone who'd given, but someone who was now meant to give up. It wasn't the car alone. That was just the last thing I could point to, the clean edge of a much messier sadness. The truth is, the erosion had begun years before quiet, subtle, almost polite in the way it emptied me. It started with forgotten calls. At first they came late, then shorter, then not at all. I would sit on the edge of the bed every Sunday evening, phone in hand, staring at the little glowing screen like it might blink to life on its own. Sometimes I'd give in and call them, let it ring twice, and hang up. I never wanted to seem desperate. I told myself they'd call back when they could. They often didn't. Mother's Days began to pass like any other Sunday. A text if I was lucky. Flowers, one year that the florist left at the wrong door. I remember opening the box and finding the petals already wilted. I clipped the stems and put them in water anyway. It's a kind of dignity in trying, even when you know the effort won't be seen. One Christmas, Mark gave me a gift card to a fast casual restaurant. I didn't say anything, just smiled and thanked him. But later that night, I sat by the tree, watching the lights flicker, and realized I'd been reduced to a barcode in his mind, something generic, something anyone could have chosen. The 100. Quiet hurts don't bleed, but they bruise. Little dismissals, casual silences, moments where I felt the room shift around me like I wasn't there. When Jamie and his wife bought their new house, I found out from a neighbor. When Mark's daughter started preschool, I saw it on Facebook before I got a call. When I mailed a hand-knit sweater to the baby, I never saw a photo of her wearing it. Maybe it never fit. Maybe they never opened the box. And yet I kept showing up. 2 birthdays, 2 barbecues, 2 hospital visits. I made pasta salad from scratch. I asked about their work, even when I didn't understand half of what they said. I kept the tone of my voice light and asked about traffic and weather when what I really wanted to say was, "Do you still see me?" I don't think they did. There were bigger things, 2 decisions made without me. When they cleaned out my basement, they threw away my wedding dress, rolled it up in a contractor bag like it was nothing but yellowed lace and mildew. They said it was falling apart anyway, that it was time. That's the word people use when they want to hurry along someone else's grief. There was the doctor's visit too. When Jamie insisted on coming, he also insisted on sitting in while I answered questions that I hadn't fully understood yet. He corrected me mid-sentence, as if I weren't the one living in this body. As if forgetting the name of a medication was proof I needed help managing everything. They started talking about me like I wasn't there. She gets tired more easily now. She doesn't need to drive that far anymore. She should probably move closer to one of us. There. I was sitting in the room. Despite my presence, they were already organizing me into categories I hadn't selected. It's strange. Really, how people can shrink you with kindness? How their concern can become a cage. There were days when I felt like a houseplant checked on, watered, but never really spoken to. Just assumed to be fine until the leaves drooped. So I began to write things down. Nothing grand, just little lists. Things I remembered, things I felt. I started each entry with the date, the weather, and what I'd eaten. Then I'd write what I couldn't say aloud. I have 8 ceramic mugs, but only ever use the green one. I miss being called every name but Mom. I'd give anything to be needed the way I used to be. There's a drawer in my kitchen full of menus and magnets and appointment cards. But the thing I touch most often is a piece of paper folded into 4 lists of the people who used to call me and when they stopped. Sometimes the worst part isn't the silence. It's knowing that the silence doesn't bother them. The final line they crossed didn't come with shouting. It came with a signature. I had just finished a routine scan at the clinic. The sort that always leaves you chilled afterward. Even in summer, the waiting room smelled faintly of plastic and overripe bananas from someone's forgotten snack bag. I sat by the window, the paper bag of my lunch unopened, the old Camry parked right outside. My ride home, my quiet space. The one thing I still moved through the world in on my own terms. When I came out, spot was empty. For a few minutes. I just stood there, arms full of papers and a cold sandwich, staring at that space like the car might reappear. I even walked up and down the rows in case I'd parked on the wrong side. I hadn't. Later that day, Mark called. He said they'd sold it, that the insurance was too much. That someone came by with an offer and we thought, well, it made sense. They'd found the extra set of keys in the kitchen drawer. And they'd signed the transfer forms just to make it easier. But I wasn't consulted. I wasn't asked. I wasn't even told until after it was done. And the thing that broke me, more than the betrayal itself, was the way he said it, like it had been a practical decision, a logical one. Like I should be grateful they'd handled it for me. It wasn't about the car. Not really. It was what the car represented. My ability to go where I pleased. To drive myself to the market for flowers. To sit by the lake shore with a book and a thermos of tea. Even for a few hours, I felt unaccounted for and free. They'd sold more than a car. They'd sold the last small piece of my independence. And they did it with my name in their handwriting. I found the paperwork days later, left in a stack of mail near the microwave, folded neatly. Tidy betrayal. There it was, my signature, forged in a version of my handwriting that looked almost right too neat, too careful. I stared at it for a long time. I could still see where someone had practiced. Mark used to do that in school, mimic my writing for excuse notes when he'd missed the bus. I never called them out on it then. I don't think they knew I knew. I folded the paper back up and placed it inside a slim red folder marked medical. I figured that's where it would matter most if I ever had to prove something. But mostly, I kept it because it was the first moment I knew the shape of my place had changed. It wasn't that I'd lost importance. It was that I'd been replaced with convenience. That cut deeper than any insult could have. This meant that I was no longer viewed as a person with desires or autonomy, but rather as just a logistical footnote. A loose thread to be managed. A few days later, Jamie called. He asked if I needed anything. His voice was casual, almost chipper, as if we'd spoken yesterday, as if everything hadn't shifted. I told him, no thank you, that I had what I needed. I meant it, because, for the first time, I realized what I needed wasn't their help. It was their respect, and they had shown me, in their careful, well-intentioned betrayal, that they couldn't offer that anymore. There's something cold about realizing you've become a project in someone else's life, like a garage to be cleaned out or a bill to be sorted. Something people talk around but not to. I used to believe that love would make people careful with you, but love, turns out, isn't always thoughtful. Sometimes it forgets you have a voice. So I stopped using mine, at least with them. That was the day I began the quiet work of reclaiming what was mine, not out of revenge, not even anger, just a knee-deep and soft to no longer be erased. I didn't yell. I didn't call a family meeting or leave voicemails with shaking hands. I didn't write a letter or slam a door, simply went quiet. Not in a dramatic way, in a way that was still deliberate, like the sound of a faucet being turned off all the way. The next time Jamie called, I let it ring. Then again, and again, till the silence became a comfort. When Mark sent a message asking if I needed a ride to the grocery store, I replied that a neighbor was helping me now. That wasn't entirely untrue. The neighbor's teenage daughter, Grace, was learning to drive, and I offered to let her practice by chauffeuring me around town once a week. I paid her in gas money and cookies. It made us both feel grown. But more than the logistics, it was the tone of things that shifted. I stopped updating them, ceased sending brief updates about new curtains, canning tomatoes, or the blooming rosebush after a 2-season absence. I stopped offering pieces of my life, and instead I started keeping them for myself. I cleaned out my kitchen drawers one afternoon and found a pink spiral-bound notebook, one of those cheap ones with a cardboard cover. I flipped it open, and the first page had my old grocery list. I tore it out. Then I began to write something else, what I remembered, what I regretted. I now understand the truth. Each page was slow and quiet, sometimes just a line. No one can steal what you've already given away. I used to be afraid of silence. I wear it like a sweater. They signed my name, but they didn't know the cost. The notebook became a ritual, not a diary, something softer, a place where I put the things that had nowhere else to go. I also made an appointment one they didn't know about. A lawyer in town recommended, by the same neighbor who lent me her daughter. His office was small, tucked behind the bakery on Wellington Street, the kind of place where you had to ring a bell to be let in. I informed him about the falsified signature, the car that had been sold, and how they had started making decisions based solely on my name. Rather than considering me as an individual, I asked if it was legal, if I had any recourse. He didn't rush me, just listened, asked a few questions, wrote some things down. Then he told me gently that what they'd done was technically a crime, but a difficult one to pursue unless I wanted the kind of fight that gets loud. I didn't. I wasn't here for war. I was here for clarity. So he helped me do something else. He helped me make a new file, one that gave me control over my own decisions in writing. He walked me through updating my registration for future property, for banking, and for health choices. We drafted new papers, ones that made me the author again. I left that office lighter, not because I had punished anyone, but because I had reclaimed something. I had a new ID mailed to me. I updated my address with the post office, and a quiet part of me smiled when I unchecked the box that shared the change with family. I chose to stand instead of hiding. Every morning after that, I began waking up with more steadiness. I walked 2 blocks to the small park, sat by the duck pond with a thermos of black tea, and watched the older couples walk laps. Some days, I'd bring my notebook. Other days, I'd just watch the water dot. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I started reading poetry again. Mary Oliver, Ada Lemon. I underlined the lines that felt like my ribs. Let me keep my mind on what matters. And the world offers itself to your imagination. And I started saving not just money, but moments. I stopped buying things I didn't need. I put aside little bits each week in a folder marked later. It felt good to have something with no one else's fingerprints on it. The thing is, silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes silence is preparation. And I was preparing slowly, gently, but fully. I moved differently after that. Not all at once, but like a river gradually cutting a new path through stone. It started with a room, spare, unremarkable room above the florist's shop on Elgin Avenue. It had once been a photography studio, one of those that printed wedding portraits on thick, glossy paper and displayed them in gold frames. Now it was empty. Pale walls. 2 windows that caught the morning light just right. And rent that I could afford without having to explain myself to anyone. I signed the lease with my own pen. My own name. No one knew I was moving. Not at first. I didn't announce it. I didn't leave a note. Simply began shifting what mattered into boxes. My books, my worn kettle, the navy cardigan with the missing button that I wore on soft days. The notebook. The photo of me and Robert by the lake, before the children came and the years filled up. I left the house like someone brushing off dust, not resentful. Just ready. The day I handed the keys back to the lawyer who had helped me with the title, I felt something I hadn't in years. Clean. Not in the hygienic sense, but the spiritual one. Like I had stepped out of a space that had forgotten how to see me. The new place was quiet. No footsteps above, no hallway arguments, no passive sighs over the dinner table. It's just me and the sound of traffic softening through the curtains. There was a bookstore 2 blocks down. The bakery recognized my preference for bran muffins and tea without any sugar. And a woman named Eliza who ran the flower shop downstairs. She had short silver hair and a way of wrapping tulips that made them feel like a secret. She never pried. I just smiled and said, "Good morning, friend," each time I passed her door. In the evenings, I began volunteering. Quietly, without fanfare, at the library's literacy corner, helping adults learn to read. It was delicate work, often slow. A man named Carl, 64, had come in because he wanted to read bedtime stories to his granddaughter without pretending. We started with simple sentences. He cried the first time he read one aloud without pausing. So did I, and it felt like healing. It was healing not only for him, but also for me. There was a rhythm to my new life. Not grand, not loud, but steady. One afternoon, I bought a plant. A trailing pothos in a white ceramic pot. I placed it on the windowsill and watched how it leaned toward the sun. The next week, I bought another. Then a third dot. Each small green leaf felt like a promise. You're still growing. I also updated the registration. I didn't just purchase a new car. I walked or took the tram now, and I liked it that way. But I registered my new address for everything that mattered. I updated my name on documents, unchecked the boxes that included emergency contact, and wrote in my own number. Instead, it wasn't loneliness. It was clarity. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel tethered to people who didn't see me or expect things from me only when it suited them. I stopped waiting for invitations that never came. I stopped pretending I was fine. When I WASN single quotes T dot somewhere along the way, I even stopped thinking of what I was doing as moving on. It was simply moving forward differently. Mark and Jamie didn't know where I'd gone. They sent messages, of course, confused ones. Just checking in. We haven't heard from you. Hope everything's okay. The kind of notes you write when you start to notice an absence, but don't want to admit it. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed to explain the life I had chosen. They had sold the car without asking, and now I was rewriting everything else quietly, but thoroughly. There's a kind of soft power in making decisions no one expects. In stepping off the path, they assumed you'd never leave. In reclaiming your name, your peace, and your space. I hadn't burned bridges. I had simply taken the long way around, found something better. It took a while before they realized what they'd lost at first. I imagine they were relieved by the silence. No more obligations to check in. No more slow meandering phone calls where I asked about the children's school plays or reminded them of upcoming appointments. No more soft hints about Sundays or anniversaries. I disappeared without ceremony, and that sort of vanishing takes time to register, but eventually the quiet grows louder than noise. It began, I think, with a birthday. Jamie's youngest turned 9. I always sent a hand-stitched card and a little parcel wrapped in paper with string. Nothing expensive, but always personal, a habit I'd started when Jamie himself was a boy. Just old enough to draw fire trucks on the walls. That year, there was no parcel, no card, no voicemail singing happy birthday off-key. I didn't forget. I just didn't send it. A week later, Mark left a voicemail. He said he hoped everything was all right. But I knew that voice, the careful tone of someone realizing they'd taken something for granted. A voice with absence behind it. There are things you lose that you don't notice until you need them. They lost the calls. Yes, the reminders. The warmth. But they also lost the small scaffolding that holds a family up, the invisible threads I used to pull together. Who remembered whose allergies, whose favorite cake, and who hated being hugged too tightly? I was the weaver. And when the weaver walks away, the threads fall silent. By Christmas, it was clear they were adrift. I didn't cook. I didn't decorate. I didn't send invites or suggest the Secret Santa names. They posted photos online, smiling faces, matching sweaters, but something in their eyes looked unsure. The kind of smile you hold when someone is missing from the frame. And I watched, not with glee or bitterness, but with a clear, deep quiet, from my little flat above the florist's. I lit a single candle and poured myself a glass of wine. Not to toast the distance, but to mark it. It's like a tide finally pulling back. I had been the one who remembered. Who gave, who forgave, who showed up. And in my absence, the hollowness was beginning to echo. I heard through a neighbor, Grace's mother, that Jamie's wife had gone back to work. And they were struggling to find after-school care, the kind of task I would have offered to help with. Pickups, snacks, a place to stay when the flu went around. But they didn't ask. And I didn't offer, because something in me knew once you teach people that you will always show up. They forget to appreciate the cost. I used to think presence was love, but sometimes absence is love too. It's the type of love that acknowledges its limits. They also lost me financially, though I doubt they knew the full extent right away. I had helped with bills in the past, quietly, discreetly. A few hundred here, a bit toward school fees there, groceries, dental work. A new tire, things I never made a fuss over. Things I thought were part of the role the invisible patchwork of motherhood extended into grandmotherhood. That stopped, not out of spite, but because I realized that love isn't meant to be measured in unpaid debts. My savings stayed in my account. I no longer dipped into it for emergencies that weren't mine. And when the time came to update my will, the lawyer gently suggested die. Made choices that would have shocked the woman I was 5 years ago. I didn't remove them entirely. I'm not cruel. But I did balance things. I added Grace, the teenager who had driven me to the market each week. I added the literacy program at the library. I added the woman downstairs, Eliza, who always left a tulip on my door on Mondays. People recognized me not for my contributions, but for my essence. It's strange, watching your own absence become a mirror. They saw themselves in it, and perhaps for the first time. I realized I had been more than a fixture, more than a convenience or a background hum. I had been a person, a whole one, and once I stepped back, they had to face what they hadn't noticed. I never said it to them directly, but I whispered it into the night more than once. You didn't lose me by accident. You lost me by inches. It was a Tuesday morning when I wrote the letter. Not because anything extraordinary happened that day. The sky was overcast, the bakery downstairs smelled faintly of cinnamon, and the pothos plant on my windowsill had sprouted 2 new leaves. But something inside me had been shifting for weeks, a slow undoing of knots I'd kept tightly wound in my chest for years. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of weak tea. And I finally put pen to paper. The letter wasn't meant to be sent. It wasn't even written for someone else, really. Not for Jamie, not for Mark, not even for Robert, though his nay lingered near the top of the page longer than I expected. It was for her, the woman I used to be. I didn't begin with dear. That felt too formal, too polite. Instead, I just started where the ache lived. You held it all together. For so long, didn't you? I let the words come as they wished. No edits, no second guessing. It's just the truth, soft and full of memory. You've bent yourself into shapes they never thanked you for. You've changed your tone, your timing, and your needs all to avoid being called difficult. You swallowed the sighs, packed the lunches, and paid the overdue balances. And when they forgot to say thank you thanked yourself quietly by lighting a candle and whispering, "At least they're okay." I paused to breathe, the steam from the tea curling up into the air like a silent witness. I wrote about the dinners left uneaten. I remember their birthdays, but they don't. The hours waiting in hospitals always last, being the last to be informed and the first to arrive. The way they laughed louder when I fell quiet. The way they looked past me in rooms where I once led the conversation. But I also wrote about the mornings I rose early to hang clean laundry on the line, even when my back ached. The way I remembered who preferred crunchy toast and who needed the crusts off. The love that never asked for applause. That lived in the unspoken. You weren't perfect, I wrote, but you loved with your whole spine. And when they called it overbearing, you simply shifted the weight. The kind of letter that only gets written once. It's not that the pain doesn't recur, but rather that a certain clarity emerges only upon release. I wrote about the car, how they signed the papers while I was still in the waiting room, the coldness of that moment, the way it cemented everything I had refused to acknowledge, that I was, to them, not a person, but a part of the past they were ready to discard. You deserved more, I wrote. But you won't beg for it anymore? Then I wrote the last line slowly, as if carving it into stone. You are not forgotten. Finally, you remember me. When I finished, I folded the letter once and placed it inside a plain white envelope. No name, no stamp. I slipped it into the bottom drawer of my desk beneath a stack of old fabric samples and dried lavender stems. I never intended to open it again, but just knowing it was there changed me. There's something sacred about acknowledging your own story without needing it validated. There is something holy in saying, "This hurt me," and not waiting for someone else to nod in agreement. Later that day, I walked to the park. The breeze was cool, and the roses were starting to open along the iron fence. I sat on the same bench where I used to take Robert on Sundays to drink coffee and watch the ducks glide across the pond. I didn't feel angry. I felt whole for the first time. I wasn't carrying the weight of what they'd done or failed to do. I had laid it down word by word onto that page. Not for justice, not for pity, but for peace, and peace, I've learned, often arrives not with trumpets, but with ink and silence. Writing that letter didn't change the past, but it changed the part of me that was still living there. My life is quiet now, okay? And that's enough. It's a tranquility that's not solitary, but rather one of choice. It lives in the rhythm of my kettle's soft whistle each morning, in the birdsong that starts just after 5, and in the gentle way the light spills across my windowsill at midday. I used to fear silence. I used to fill it with their noise, their needs, their demands, their absence thou. I let it settle around me like a well-worn shawl. My days aren't dramatic. They begin with tea, sometimes a short walk, and often a slow stretch in the living room. The body creaks more than it used to, but it still carries me on. I thank it for that. I plant herbs in terracotta pots on my tiny balcony. Rosemary, mint, lavender. They grow in crooked ways, but they grow all the same, once a week. I visit the library not out of habit, but out of joy. There's something tender about touching the spine of a book. Choosing one without a recommendation, just following instinct. It reminds me that I still have taste, still have curiosity. Not everything I do is in service of others anymore, Eliza. The florist's daughter downstairs sometimes brings me leftover blooms. Not because I ask, not because I'm useful, just because. We'll sit together in the kitchen, two women from different seasons of life, and we'll talk. Not about family or betrayal or what was lost. It's just about the way lemon balm smells when you crush it between your fingers. Or how the moon last night looked bruised and golden. I don't tell her everything. She doesn't ask. That's the beauty of new connections. They aren't built on debt. Every now and then, I see Jamie's name flash on my phone. I don't ignore it. I answer calmly. I let him talk. I nod. I keep my voice soft. But I don't give the pieces of myself that used to vanish in those calls. I don't rush to fix it. I don't offer to come over. I listen. I wish him well. And when I hang up, I return to my life untouched. There's power in that, a kind of power that doesn't need applause or confrontation. It's just stillness. Just the quiet confidence of knowing I survived what they didn't see. I've stopped explaining myself to people who never asked the right questions. And I've learned to celebrate moments that don't need witnesses. Like yesterday, I baked a pear tart for no one in particular. I sliced the pears evenly, glazed them with apricot jam, and watched the crust brown gently in the oven. When it was done, I let it cool, cut one slice, and ate it slowly by the window. No compliments. Audience. Just warmth and cinnamon and the sound of my own breath. Peace isn't something they can take now. They attempted to hurt me in their own subtle ways, not out of cruelty, but due to carelessness. That's sometimes worse. When people don't even know they're hurting you because they never learned to see you in the first place. But I see me now fully, not as the mother or the wife or the errand runner or the carpool planner, not as the safety net or the background character or the extra seat at the holiday table. I'm the story now, and it's a soft story unfolding sacred. I write sometimes little things. Observations, dreams I remember when I wake. Lines like from the books I read. I keep a journal now, tucked in the drawer where the old letter still sleeps. They're both parts of me, the woman I was and the woman I'm becoming. There are still hard moments. I don't pretend otherwise. Grief visits uninvited, usually around dusk. That's when memory likes to stretch its fingers and flip through the old chapters. But even when it hurts, I know now it's not weakness to feel. It's evidence that I loved, and I will never apologize for that. One day, I might tell my story aloud. Maybe not to them. Maybe not even to anyone I know now. But perhaps someone, somewhere, will hear it and whisper, "That sounds like me." And in that whisper, I'll live on. Not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that it's never too late to choose yourself. Not out of bitterness, out of reverence. And if you asked me now what I wish they knew, it's this. I wasn't angry, was finally empty. And that was beautiful.